Dexter Morgan is not escaping because he is some flawless mastermind. He is escaping because everyone around him suddenly develops the investigative instincts of a houseplant. Think about it. A kill room near glass windows and a sidewalk in New York City. Not Miami, not a swamp, New York. A place where cameras exist on every corner, except, apparently, in the exact places this plot needs them to vanish. People get drugged in public and nobody reacts. Security footage is magically missing until the episode remembers it should matter. Detectives alternate between Sherlock Holmes and Who is that woman, while the answer is sitting on tape. And then there's Batista, one of the few characters with actual history, actual emotional stakes, reduced to a moving target for the finale's convenience. Not because it's the only logical outcome, because it's the cleanest way for the story to keep Dexter's hands technically clean, while still cashing in on shock. So here's the real question. If Dexter keeps winning, who exactly is letting him? The cops? The tech? The writing room? In the next few minutes, this breakdown exposes the pattern, scene by scene, of how Dexter Resurrection doesn't outsmart anyone. It simply lowers the bar until Dexter can step over it. Dexter has always thrived on a particular kind of fantasy. Not the glamorous kind with capes, but the more improbable wish fulfillment of a serial killer who somehow moves through modern life like a ghost, leaving behind plastic wrap, corpses, and conveniently absent surveillance footage, while everyone else stares blankly into the middle distance. Dexter Resurrection continues that proud tradition with a straight face, as if the audience has not spent 8 seasons and one definitive revival, learning that the laws of probability in this universe function more like polite suggestions. The result is, predictably, a show that can be simultaneously gripping and laughable, often in the same scene, powered less by coherent logic than by the magnetic fact that Michael C. Hall can sell nearly anything, including narrative gymnastics that would strain a Cirque du Soleil performer. Consider, for example, the spectacularly questionable kill room decision-making that sets an early tone. Building a murder setup inside a store with glass windows, beside a sidewalk, in a city famous for never sleeping, is the sort of choice that invites a simple question. Was the goal secrecy? Or was the goal to test whether the audience has developed selective amnesia? Even granting the premise that New York is a place where nobody notices anything, where someone can be drugged in public and passers-by glide past with the spiritual energy of background extras, the staging still reads as aggressively careless. The defense that the kill room is in the back, rather than directly pressed against the windows, is technically true in the same way it is technically true that a bank vault is inside a bank. It does not erase the fact that the operation requires plastic sheeting, time, movement, and a complete absence of the curious, the suspicious, the bored, or the merely observant. The plastic on the outer doors, even if not part of the kill room itself, is not subtle. It is the kind of detail that makes a normal person hesitate before walking in, and makes a police officer's ears perk up even if they arrive to buy a sandwich. Of course, the show's counterargument is familiar. Dexter tends to slip when he is fixated on the killing and neglects the preparation. That is a plausible character flaw, and it is also an extremely convenient explanation for writing choices that require the world to be soft and forgiving. The frustration is understandable. The scene practically begs for shouting at the screen, a chorus of "leave immediately," directed at a protagonist who has built his entire identity on meticulous control, only to abandon that control whenever the plot needs a shove. And if the objective is urgency, perhaps the more rational move would have been less theatrical staging and more strategic planning. Rather than trying to lure Rapunzel back, the next move should have been underway before the first plan began to wobble. This is not even the franchise's most egregious flirtation with public incompetence. The series has long treated drugging someone in a high-traffic location as a casual errand. The airport abduction remains a kind of peak absurdity, an all-time monument to the belief that CCTV cameras are decorative, and that airport personnel only exist to misplace luggage. Resurrection inherits that legacy and expands it into a broader pattern. Dexter in the Wild, without the infrastructure of a police department, is supposed to be less capable, less plugged into databases, less able to glide into crime scenes, less able to sculpt reality around himself. Yet the show compensates not by grounding him, but by sanding down the world around him, reducing obstacles, shortening the distance between problem and solution, and letting coincidences do the heavy lifting. This is why the story can feel dumber now. Not necessarily because Dexter has changed, but because the surrounding institutions, law enforcement, technology, public awareness, are treated as optional. The script wants the thrill of modern settings without the accountability of modern systems. That same tension plays out in the strangely heated debate about Dexter's finances, an argument that exists only because the show refuses to clarify what it could easily clarify. On paper, the case for Dexter having money is not complicated. He worked for years as a forensic technician, blood spatter analysis, for Miami Metro. A stable salary over time, especially paired with an unflashy lifestyle, can produce savings. Before marriage, there was no indication of extravagant spending. A decent apartment and a boat are not inherently contradictory to a middle-class income, especially if the boat was purchased cheaply or inherited or assisted by a guiding paternal figure who for years financed not just Dexter's upbringing, but his training regimen in homicide logistics. After Rita's death, the children moved to their maternal grandparents, eliminating the ongoing costs of supporting them. Dexter's marital home was discussed as a saleable asset, and the implication later is that it was sold. He handed Harrison to Hannah, and based on what is known, did not continue to financially support them. In New Blood, he lived under an alias as a store clerk. The income there would not explain comfort, but the premise of Dexter's post-Miami life was never starting from scratch. It was disappearing with preparation. There were go bags, cash stashes, and fake identification, an established pattern suggesting multiple contingency plans. Under that reading, a modest move, steal a car, buy clothes, drive into the city, purchase a middle-class vehicle, rent a basement apartment from a new acquaintance, does not require billionaire status. It requires a few tens of thousands and the kind of obsessive planning Dexter is supposed to embody. And yet the real question is not whether Dexter ever had money. It is whether he could access it without negating the entire point of faking his death. If he drove into a hurricane intending to disappear, or die, bank accounts under Dexter Morgan become unusable without setting off alarms. Pulling funds in a traceable way would be an excellent method for informing the world that Dexter is alive and has suddenly developed a strong interest in ATM withdrawals. If his Iron Lake home burned down, any cash stashed there becomes ash along with it. When he bolts from the hospital, he does not appear to stop for a leisurely visit to a safety deposit box. So the most coherent explanation is also the least satisfying, that Dexter has additional accounts under other identities and had already built a layered financial structure long before the hurricane, precisely to enable flight without detection. This is credible within the character's established paranoia and skill set, and it also demands the audience accept a great deal of unseen infrastructure. The debate ends, as it often does with this franchise, in a pragmatic shrug. Disbelief is suspended because the story is more enjoyable when it moves forward. The problem is not that the explanation cannot exist. It is that the show relies on the audience to do the explaining. The same pattern, strong emotional intent padded with shaky mechanics, defines Angel Batista's role in Resurrection, and it is here that the series finally admits what it has always known. Batista was never built for cold protocol. He is a heart-led character, and heart-led characters do not behave like tidy, strategic law enforcement professionals. They behave like people, meaning they behave irrationally, especially when humiliated by betrayal. Batista spent years believing Dexter was his friend, then years mourning him, only to discover that the man was a killer who deceived everyone and whose orbit is littered with the dead, colleagues, suspects, and those who got too close, with Dokes and LaGuardia hanging over everything like unresolved ghosts. Expecting Batista to react with careful steps and procedural caution when strapped to a kill table, surrounded by serial killer memorabilia, and confronted with a billionaire collector openly labeling Dexter the Bay Harbor Butcher, is an amusing fantasy. At that moment, rationality is not on the menu. Emotion is. Rage is. The need to reclaim dignity in the only way available is. So the lunge, the impulsive charge, the refusal to go home mentally, these choices align with character, even if they offend the audience's desire for tactical competence. Where the show's handling becomes more contentious is not Batista's emotional behavior, but the structural use of his death. Some view it as shock value. Others view it as the only viable narrative exit that preserves the show's internal moral arithmetic. If Dexter kills Batista, the audience revolt would be predictable and justified. It would cross a line that the series has always treated as radioactive, because Batista represents the show's remaining emotional innocence, the good-hearted cop who cared too much. Having Prater kill Batista, especially after Prater explicitly demands the kill as a price of entry into a club of killers, serves multiple purposes at once. It allows the story to continue without forcing Dexter to commit the unforgivable in the audience's eyes. It cements Prater as a legitimate target under Dexter's code, by ensuring Prater has blood on his hands in an undeniable way. It maintains Dexter's self-image as someone who kills bad people, even as the narrative repeatedly shows how elastic that definition becomes. It is, from a showrunning perspective, a clean choice. From an emotional perspective, it is less clean. There is a lingering complaint that Batista deserved a better send-off, and that the finale's emotional bookkeeping was oddly thin, particularly given the intensity of Dexter's guilt in earlier moments, such as a raw yell in the vault scene. When a character has been chasing the truth for nearly a decade of narrative time, when the tension has been built across eras of the franchise, the exit should land with weight. Instead, there is a sense of emptiness, a refusal to sit with the consequences long enough to let them sting. That emptiness becomes more glaring because Batista's pursuit was not merely a subplot, it was a major engine of momentum. Remove it, and the concern becomes obvious. Can any replacement antagonist or investigator replicate that history, that personal betrayal, that simmering connection to Miami Metro's unresolved trauma? The prospect of a second season, Dexter hunting serial killers across the country while an unusual detective and a dogged pursuer trail him, sounds entertaining in concept. But entertainment is not the same as emotional stakes. Batista's chase mattered because it was relational. It was not just a cop investigating a killer, it was a friend realizing his friendship was weaponized against him. Replacing that with a new pursuer risks feeling like a procedural reset, a fresh set of eyes discovering what the audience already knows. It can work, but it is a downgrade in intimacy, unless the writing finds a new, equally personal pressure point. The show's broader credibility challenges remain a familiar parade of plot conveniences, dressed up as suspense. One of the more exhausting examples is the hotel setting, which seems to function as a luxury property, staffed entirely by invisible spirits. Harrison's ability to kill someone, dismember a body, and operate with near total freedom in a high-class environment is the kind of scenario that demands a security ecosystem. Cameras in hallways, staff movement, keycard logs, housekeeping schedules, and at least one person asking why the elevator smells like panic. The narrative tries to patch this by eventually acknowledging missing cameras, but even that admission highlights the absurdity rather than resolving it. The same hotel conveniently allows Dexter to swipe a security card and wander, as if the building has adopted an honor system. Meanwhile, law enforcement behaves as though basic investigative steps are optional add-ons. CCTV is checked late, despite the obvious value in tracking final movements. A detective who is framed as exceptionally sharp can look at footage and ask, "Who is that?" about a woman seen with a victim, only for the story to reveal that footage placing Harrison with both the victim and the woman existed all along. It is not merely a missed detail. It is a structural inconsistency that makes competence appear and disappear depending on what the episode needs. This inconsistency is highlighted further in the handling of the season's brilliant detective, whose portrayal oscillates between near superhuman insight and ordinary police blindness. Early on, she pieces together events with startling precision, seemingly mapping the hotel's crime like a chess player. Later, she drifts into the franchise's traditional mode of law enforcement inertia, the kind of complacency that has always allowed Dexter to thrive. The attempted explanation is that she is not a super genius, but rather someone with an exceptional eye for detail, possibly shaped by a neurodivergent focus that excels at patterns while sometimes missing the broader narrative. That is a thoughtful character concept. The problem is execution. A consistent characterization would show how her strengths and blind spots interact across the season. Instead, the shift feels like two different outlines stitched together: competence when the plot needs a credible threat, and incompetence when the plot needs Dexter to breathe. It is a familiar Dexter World problem, but that does not make it less noticeable. The series doubles down on convenience through an imposter killer subplot that treats technology as magic. A killer carries around a bag labeled with his workplace name, yet simultaneously goes to elaborate lengths to mask his features with camera blocking technology, as if careful anonymity and branded accessories are complementary strategies. Dexter then identifies the suspect by standing outside a door and noticing that one employee out of a small group lacks a photo on a website. In a supposed major tech company, the absence of a headshot becomes the equivalent of a confession. This is not deduction. It is the narrative flipping a coin and calling it detective work. The show also leans on background check websites that hand over home addresses with the kind of generosity usually reserved for fairy godmothers. Law enforcement, meanwhile, openly discusses an active murder case in front of a hostile hotel manager, because discretion is apparently for other professions. They fail to secure basic information like a suspect's address, then theatrically announce the need to get everything on him after allowing him to leave. The logic is not simply thin, it is performative, written to create the impression of investigation without the substance of it. Even Dexter's own arc is padded with improbable leniency. He wakes up in a hospital and is effectively cleared of wrongdoing despite killing a cop, an act the narrative tries to smooth over because the franchise has already learned what happens when it ends with consequences audiences dislike. He steals a car to escape and drives it around New York as though vehicle theft comes with a complimentary invisibility cloak. The car is not treated as hot because that would require the world to respond to crimes the protagonist commits when he is not killing the right people. When the car is impounded, he retrieves it without meaningful friction. And perhaps the most quietly absurd part, the escape itself feels unnecessary. Batista was not arriving at the hospital to slap on handcuffs. The scenario could have been navigated through basic conversation, but conversation would not deliver the dramatic energy of a fugitive sprint, so the script opts for motion over plausibility. Then there is the bold choice to stage a daylight street killing with an unmistakably brutal weapon, executed by a major character in full public view, as if urban streets are closed sets. It is a visually striking scene. It is also the kind of act that should ignite a chain reaction. Bystanders screaming, phones recording, police response within minutes, a tidal wave of digital evidence. Instead, the story treats it as a contained beat, because the show's true priority is not realistic consequence, but forward propulsion. This, again, is not new for Dexter. The original run had plot armor thick enough to stop bullets. The realistic consequence of a blood spatter analyst repeatedly searching police databases for future missing persons would have been immediate detection, because database queries are logged, audited, and traceable. In the real world, misuse of such systems leads to discipline, termination, and sometimes prosecution. The fact that missing persons would be tied to Dexter's search history would be a bright flare pointing straight at him. The show avoided that reality for years, and Resurrection continues to do so with modern technology, modern cameras, and modern data culture, because acknowledging those realities would dismantle the premise. And yet, despite all this, the series remains watchable, often compulsively so, because it understands its own central asset. Michael C. Hall is the engine. Even when the plot collapses under its own weight, the performance supplies gravity. There is a reason the show can be described as incredibly dumb and a lot of fun in the same breath. The lead actor projects control, humor, and menace with such clarity that the audience is willing to forgive what it would mock in any other production. Bringing back the father figure as Dexter's dark passenger reinforces that strength, restoring the familiar chemistry that anchors Dexter's internal conflict. It also helps that the tone feels closer to the older, sharper Dexter, quippier, darker, more self-aware, rather than the moody drift that characterized parts of the later original seasons. This tonal correction matters. It gives the franchise a sense of identity again, even when the mechanics wobble. Harrison, however, remains a divisive presence, and the impatience with him is not subtle. His scenes can feel like narrative obligations rather than organic drama, prompting the temptation to skip them. The storyline wants him to be both a mirror and a complication, Dexter's legacy made flesh, the moral reckoning that the protagonist can never outrun. But the execution too often turns him into a device, present when the plot needs stakes, absent when it would complicate Dexter's momentum. The franchise cannot decide whether it wants Harrison to be central or disposable, and that indecision bleeds into the audience's tolerance. For some, the cleanest solution would be to remove him entirely and let the show focus on what it does best: Dexter's predatory ritual, his self-justifications, and the cat-and-mouse tension with those circling him. Others accept Harrison as unavoidable and hope he is integrated with sharper purpose rather than used as a lever to force emotional beats. All of this circles back to the question the franchise keeps refusing to answer cleanly. What does it want to be now? If the goal is gritty realism, Resurrection is an extended exercise in self-sabotage. If the goal is old-fashioned television momentum, episodic intrigue, serial arcs, cliffhangers, and a central character whose charisma overrides logic, then the show is succeeding on its own terms. That may be why it can inspire wildly different judgments. Some see it as full of plot holes, others insist it is legitimately good so far, and both can be correct, depending on what standards are being applied. Dexter has never been a grounded story. It has always been a stylized moral fantasy where the killer is the protagonist and the world bends just enough to keep him moving. The audience's relationship with that fantasy is the variable. Some enjoy the bending as part of the charm. Others notice it more sharply now that the show asks to be taken seriously again. The finale debate about Batista's choices crystallizes this tension between character logic and procedural logic. Why would a seasoned detective go to Leon Prater, a businessman, not law enforcement, and speak candidly about Dexter being the Bay Harbor butcher? From a procedural standpoint, it is reckless. From Batista's emotional standpoint, it can be framed as an attempt to warn a potential victim, based on the belief that Dexter kills those who threaten exposure. Batista is impulsive. He leads with feeling. He has acted rashly before, including in moments tied to personal loyalty. He also may not have expected that a wealthy, respectable-seeming figure would respond by kidnapping him and offering him up as bait. Yet the criticism remains valid. If Batista truly believed Dexter would kill Prater, then the more sobering inference is that Prater is entangled in darkness himself. A cop with instincts honed by years of murder cases might reasonably pause and ask why a civilian billionaire is even in Dexter's orbit. The narrative chooses not to linger there because lingering would slow the episode's acceleration toward the kill table. The show's defenders argue that Batista was effectively doomed once he revealed himself, and that his desperation explains the miscalculation. The skeptics argue the writing deliberately blunted his competence, reducing him to a ranting obsession about the Bay Harbor butcher rather than letting him articulate the far stronger evidence available: Dexter's fake death, the security footage, the on-camera killing of Oliver Saxon, details that would make him sound less like a conspiracy theorist and more like a credible whistleblower. Both readings exposed the same truth. The show needed Batista in a specific place to deliver a specific climax, and his intelligence became negotiable. And still, the franchise persists because it knows exactly what it is selling. It sells the thrill of a familiar voiceover morality play. It sells the pleasure of a protagonist who is both monster and narrator, both predator and comedian. It sells the tension of watching him improvise under pressure, even when the improvisation requires the universe to politely cooperate. It sells the indulgent fantasy that the code can sanitize violence, that trophies can be reclaimed like heirlooms, that identity can be shed and rebuilt with suspicious ease. It even sells the prospect of further seasons with a wink. The audience has been promised endings before, and the idea of another botched finale is treated less like a threat and more like an inevitability. Yet the hope remains that the next phase, if it arrives, has direction, because direction is the one thing plot armor cannot replace. If the series wants to run for multiple seasons, it will need more than convenient escapes and magically delayed investigations. It will need a coherent emotional spine to replace the one it just severed. In the end, Dexter Resurrection is a showcase of the franchise's most enduring contradiction. It is both ridiculous and compelling, both sharply performed and loosely constructed, both nostalgic and opportunistic. It invites criticism and then dares the audience to keep watching anyway, confident that charisma will do what logic cannot. And it is, inconveniently, correct. The show can be yelled at, mocked for its improbabilities, and interrogated for its inconsistencies, and then immediately forgiven the moment Dexter Morgan steps into frame and reminds everyone why this story refuses to stay dead. Subscribe.